Hello, Lisa here. Welcome back to my channel. I am going to be doing a VR to Silvain's Deadly Sins, and I'm going to be talking about the decks that represent the 7 deadly sins to me. So if you haven't already seen this tag going around, where have you been? It's been all over TarotTube. It's super fun. I've been watching a bunch of the videos. I knew I had to do a tag, and I don't get to a lot of tags. I feel like I always have so many videos I want to make, and it just doesn't end up happening. But I really, really, really wanted to prioritize this one because it just looked like a lot of fun. And I felt like doing it in a Flames of Hell sort of background would just be perfect. And I was struck by creative inspiration, and I really, really wanted to participate. So if you haven't seen the original video from Silvain's Deadly Sins, I will have that linked down below. And definitely check that first video out. One of the things that Silvain said was that we should really make this our own. I had written down the prompts from, and I apologize, I'd written down the specific take on the prompts from somebody else's video that I had watched, and I now can't remember which one, and I was not smart enough to write it down. So I apologize if I've literally like stolen the exact approach from somebody. Not my intent, but these were the prompts that I first like really grabbed me, and I was like, oh yes, I want to do this. So I have my 7 deadly sins here beside me, and I'll be really curious to hear if any of these are surprises to you guys. I'm very transparent here on the channel about how I feel about my decks, and so I'm really excited to hear from you guys if you feel like sharing in the comments, like as we go through, which ones you totally saw coming. I'm sure there will be some. And which ones you were completely stunned by. So with that said, we're going to get into it. The first prompt is greed. And the prompt that I wrote down from whoever's video I had been watching at the time was a deck that you don't share with anyone. And there is one of those, and I'm sure you can all guess what it is. But it is my first edition Mons Tarot. This is the one that is in its special box that Dustin made me with its special rock, and it is the first edition. I do have multiple copies of this deck now. I have the second edition, I have a pocket edition, both of which I'm more than happy to share and read for other people with. And to be completely fair, I have read for Peggy with this deck because, of course, you know, it's Peggy. And she's basically a part of me. But for the most part, I do not share this one for other people. I use this only to read for myself. It lives in a special place. It's separate from my other decks. It's just everything to me. I love this deck. I've talked about it so much over the years I've had my channel. This is one of my favorite cards of life. It was a bonus card called the Illuminator, and it's very much about self-worth, and I love that. And this deck just really, it just speaks to me in such a special way that this is my greed deck. Like, it's all mine, all for me. And it just feels like something super special and that I don't really even want other people touching, which I'm not usually like that very much with my decks, but in this case, I definitely am. So that is my greed deck. The next one is Wrath, and this is a deck you're angry with. And I was like, if I'm angry with the deck, I typically don't keep it. So I did actually have to pull one out of my purgatory bin to talk about, because this one actually did make me angry, and there's a bit of a story to it. So see if you can guess before I show it. The Mystical Medleys Tarot. This was sent to me for review by Liminal 11, and I have to say, this was actually one. Now, Liminal 11 typically will send me the new releases, which I love. I get a chance to check them out, and if they resonate, if I want to share them, then I share them, and that's great. This was one that I specifically reached out to my contact at Liminal 11 and was like, are you planning on sending this to me? Please send this to me, because I'm really excited about it. And I was very excited about it. This is a vintage cartoon deck. It's such a cool aesthetic. I love it. I love all the details in the box. I mean, this even, look at this. This just this for this. Hold on. Let me just zoom in on the flames and this amazing scene, because I'm probably going to take a photo for my thumbnail, because that's amazing. It's incredible. Okay, anyways, on this background, I mean, hello. Anyway, I actually really think this box design is super fun. It does make the boxes a little bigger and clunkier than they probably would otherwise be, but I think it's really clever, and I like that they do it. You guys, I was so excited. I cannot even begin to tell you how excited I was for this deck. And then, like, I love the backs. I love the aesthetic of it. I love this vintage cartoon feel. I love that the cards have this kind of like overlay that makes them look dirty. My only complaint about that is I wish they had varied that dirty overlay on the cards, because it's identical card to card, which does break the, I guess, immersion of feeling like you have this old vintage deck in your hands, and I wish that had been different. But that is my only actual complaint about the deck from an objective standpoint. Everything else I feel about this deck, and the reason I'm mad at it, is purely subjective, because it is delightful. It is delightful in every possible way. I love this deck. Like in theory, I love this deck. This is a deck that I'm even getting angry, like thinking about it. Because by the end of my walkthrough with this deck, I realized that as much as I was charmed by it, as much as I absolutely adore everything about it, I didn't want to read with it. I couldn't read with it. It doesn't, it does what it does so well that it actually makes it difficult for me to read. Here's an example. So this is purely subjective. Please, if you love this deck, keep loving it. I wish I could. like truly. So what I'm about to say may mess with the way you look at it. And if that's the case, I just invite you to mute me for a moment until I'm done talking about this particular deck so that it doesn't mess with your enjoyment of it. Because I'd hate to do that to somebody else. But here's what I've noticed. The Chariot card, for example, is a card to me about confidence, about really putting yourself forward and like knowing what direction you're going to walk. And I like to see that confidence in the card. But the facial expression on this character, to me, looks nervous, worried. And while, yes, there's an aspect of the Chariot card you could argue, and you could probably argue for every single one of these cards for the facial expressions that you see. Like she almost looks surprised to have completed her journey in the World card. The facial expressions, I'm a very visual person. The reason I enjoy having such a vast collection of decks is because I enjoy working with different images and incorporating those images into my readings. And this is the important piece. I incorporate what I see in the card into my reading. And what I realized is that the facial expressions sometimes worked for me in the cards and sometimes completely took me in a different direction from the direction I really kind of want to go when I'm reading cards. And that meant that in its own way, as much as this is very much kind of like a vintage cartoon Rider-Waite-Smith clone in its own way, as much as it has that Rider-Waite-Smith symbology, it was messing with me in ways that I didn't appreciate. Like here, our Knight of Pentacles is holding a scythe. Again, that doesn't have to be a nod to the Death card, but in my head, that's where it went. And so I found myself looking into the details of the cards being thrown off. And again, you can definitely make an argument for every facial expression. Like here, it's actually great. Like he's worked hard. He doesn't know how it's going to turn off. Maybe he's worried. It works. But there's somewhere it just didn't work. The facial expressions didn't work. And one of the hallmarks of vintage cartoons was just how over the top their expressions were. Like here, the Wheel of Fortune is like pretty terrifying. And sure, that's true. Here, the Hermit looks terrified. But I don't want my Hermit to look terrified. I want my Hermit to look calm and wise and quiet and introspective. So there was just a lot of issues. And by the time, I'm not kidding, when I finished my walkthrough of this deck, I picked the deck up, put it back in its box. I just finished the video. And I went out to where Peggy was in her sewing area. And I took the box to her ironing board. And I like put it down. And I said, I don't like it. And I had this whole big pouty moment. I was so upset that I didn't like it because I wanted to like it. And I mean, in theory, I do like it. I just don't like the idea of working with it. And that's not how I decide whether or not a deck is going to stay in my collection is, am I going to work with it? And since I knew I wasn't going to want to work with it, I was devastated. I was so upset and disappointed and certainly angry. Angry that I had so much hype going into it and then it didn't land. And I don't do that a lot. I don't get a lot of hype going in anymore. Like nowadays, I feel like most of the time, I get this could work because I know myself and I don't know for sure until I get it in. But this one I was so convinced was going to work and then it didn't. And I was just really really mad about it. I talked about this deck for a really long time. I'm going to move on now. But it was so perfect for the Wrath category that I had to. The next category is Envy, and the prompt I wrote down was a deck you wanted because others had it. And that deck for me is definitely the Mary L. Tarot. This is my first edition Mary L., one of my first trims as well, so it's a little uneven. The Mary L. Tarot is one of those decks that I feel like is really incredible. I feel like it contributed a lot to the conversation about tarot. And one of the things that I appreciate about the Mary L. is that it does sort of blend meanings and interpretations of the tarot from Rider-Waite-Smith, from Thoth, from Marseille even, and kind of weaves them together in this sort of esoteric depth that was super unique to me at the time that I got it. And I remember feeling like it was too much for me when I first got it. And then I worked with it and I took the time to study it and get to know it. And I had some really profound experiences with it. I sometimes struggle with whether or not it's meant to stay in my collection because I reach for it so rarely, but it has been a powerful teacher. And I also feel like once I have studied Thoth, I may regret having passed it on if I do. So I keep it. Now I modified mine to be borderless and I used silver Sharpie to add the suit symbol, well, the elemental symbol and the number for the card. and I wrote the titles for the majors. And I really like this. Now, this is the first edition, which has the beautiful but awful Hierophant card, which I may have already passed. And it was a really divisive card for people. I think people loved it or hated it. Here it is. This was a really intense card, but it was also really important to me for a number of personal reasons that helped me to really address some stuff in my life. At the time that I decided I wanted this, I was seeing it featured on so many YouTube channels, and I was hearing people I respected just praise it up and down and left and right. And I was like, well, I have to give it a try. And it was so unique. I think that was one of the things, is that this was around the time in my tarot journey when I realized that tarot didn't have to all look kind of the same. And this was one of the ones that went so far off the beaten path that I was really fascinated and intrigued by it. So that is the Marielle Tarot. Definitely fell into that category of wanting it because other people had it. And then it grew from there to be a deck that I appreciated for its own reasons and on its own merits. But I do appreciate it. I don't work with it a lot right now. I don't talk about it a lot right now because I'm not working with it. But I do wonder if that's going to shift when I understand the thought system a little bit better. The next category is Lust. A deck you like for aesthetic reasons only, or that you bought for aesthetic reasons only. And there's only one deck I could think of like that in my collection, although there are a couple that I bought primarily for aesthetics, which have turned out to be really wonderful working decks for me. But this is the one that I really struggled with for a long time, and then I finally bought it literally just to have it. And that is the La Corte de Tarocchi. Now, I have read with this deck for myself a few times. It's my only Il Meneghello deck. It's really lovely. There were a few things that really fascinated me about this deck specifically. One of them being the art style. Oops. And one of them being the shape of the cards and the feel of the cards. So this deck is very much to me an aesthetic experience. It's a really unique hand cut. It's super uneven. Like shuffling it is like, it's so thick. Shuffling it is like this process of hand over hand, but it feels like a kind of thick paper, like a kind of really thick art paper that's fully uncoated. It feels like I'm holding something old and medieval. And I love that about this deck. I love picking it up and playing with the cards and kind of shuffling them a little bit in my hands like I just did and laying them out. The shape is so unique, the way that they're very tall and slender that way. But I do actually really enjoy the illustrations of this deck. It feels very grown up and serious for me. I feel like this would be the perfect deck for like a cosplay or like a LARP or something where you really needed a medieval deck. But then again, I do find this deck to feel somewhat delicate, in the sense that I feel like it would be very easily water damaged. I feel like it would crease very easily if mishandled. So I don't want to actually take it anywhere where it could get hurt. But I do think it's really unique and super special. And I coveted it for a really long time purely for that reason. I would hear just the sound of people messing with the cards. And it was so alluring and so sexy. Like just the cardstock, the shape, the feel. This is very much my Lust deck. It's the one that I got for that aesthetic reason. And it's one that I've never been tempted to rehome, despite the fact that I don't work with it at all. And see my earlier point about the fact that I don't typically do that. I don't typically keep decks that I don't want to work with. But this is an exception because it's just absolutely stunning and feels special. And I like pulling it out every once in a while to play with. And that's enough for me. But because I have this, I've talked myself out of so many other similar purchases because I'm like, well, I have this one to be that sort of sexy, touch it, feel it, make it, appreciate it deck. I have one of these. So I don't really want a whole lot else in this category of something that's going to sit on a shelf, come down every once in a while to be played with, and then be put away again. But it is so special. All right, the next one is Gluttony. And I really loved the approach. Again, I wish I could remember who used these specific terms. But the Gluttony was a deck that I didn't want, but I purchased anyway. Now, I've done this a couple of times. And in fact, I owe you all a video about decks that I anti-hauled, but then later got anyway and how it worked out. And I'm definitely going to do that. I have a list. I'm working on it. It's on my to-do list for sure. But there was one deck for sure that I knew fit perfectly neatly into this category. A deck that I knew I didn't want, but I bought it anyway. And that is the Deviant Moon Tarot. And many of you will already know how this turned out. And I actually have two. I have a divided Peggy bag, and I have two copies. I have the Independent Paradoxical, and I have the original borderless US Games version. So this is the one that I actually use primarily. This was a deck that I was very vocal on social media and elsewhere in saying that I was not a fan. I thought the artwork was creepy. I thought it was creepy just to be creepy. I didn't like it. And then I was at a bookstore or something one day, and I picked up an actual physical copy of it. And I think it was even sealed. I don't think I even had a chance to flip through the cards. And I'm like, what the heck? I'm going to just bring it home and see what happens. And I had the most profound experience. I was like completely enchanted. The moment I could see the artwork up close and really appreciate the texture and the detail and the colors in the artwork, something shifted in me. And from then on, I was like, yeah, it's creepy, but like it's also stunning. And I don't know how to explain it. It's still, it doesn't give me that creepy feeling anymore, but it does give me, these feel like wise shadow teachers to me, rather than like something that's dark and scary and malevolent. Is that the word I'm looking for? Yeah. It doesn't feel malevolent. It doesn't feel harmful. It feels rather like really no-nonsense spirit guides from my own personal shadow who are going to help me illuminate the things that I don't want to look at. And that is what really tipped me over the edge. And this deck, a deck that I vocally detested, became one that I absolutely love. And it would be one that I would keep no matter what. Like I cannot ever imagine. And in fact, other dark, shadowy, spooky decks, they just don't land for me because this one is just so spectacularly done. And the artwork is so rich and perfect for me in every way that I can't imagine any other deck doing what this deck does for me. And it was partly actually inspired, that first purchase, by getting a reading with this deck and really being amazed at how good it was. But then I decided, well, what the heck? But I didn't like it. I knew I didn't like it. I bought it anyway, and I ended up loving it. And I will say this is very much the exception for me, that experience. Most of the time, if I don't like it and I buy it, I do have some regrets later. But in this case, I did not, and it was spectacular, and I'm so glad I have it. And I've told that story so much, and it's so fun for me whenever somebody else has the same experience with this deck. But I want to be clear, I don't think that will be everybody's experience. I think for some people, if you think this is dark and creepy, then you get it in hand, it'll still be dark and creepy. I definitely think that that's probably more likely to be the case. But for the people that have had a similar experience to me, I'm always so excited to hear about it because I'm like, it was what it felt like. It was like I really disliked it strongly. And then now I love it. And to have such a swing of opinion to me is really rare and special. And I love it. That brings us to the final category, which is the Sloth category, the Sloth Deadly Sin. And Sloth is a deck you use when you are feeling lazy. And there is one that came immediately to mind. I apologize in advance because it is out of print. I think everything else you can technically still purchase except for like first editions and things of stuff that I've shown. But this deck is literally my cuddly, cozy, I don't want to think, I just want a little message, and it's still a tarot, and it just feels unique and special and whatever. And it is my Guardian Angel Tarot. This was a Doreen Virtue Radley Valentine deck originally, and I did not purchase it when it was a Doreen Virtue, but I did purchase it once it was only Radley Valentine on the book. This deck, as far as I know, is completely out of print. There is more decks by Radley Valentine, and I do think he has specifically a very sweet, nurturing, kind approach to tarot. And I think if that is appealing to you, or if this deck is appealing to you, his other decks will probably be similarly appealing. I do have another one of his called the Angel Tarot, which I like, but this is my first and my favorite. And it was also the first time I ever trimmed a deck using Don Michel's, careful measurement method and multicolored edging, and it's so perfect. I totally copied Don Michel's mod for this, took off the gilding, and then added these beautiful pastel colors to match the cards. Anyways, okay, babbling aside, this is so far from my aesthetic, I don't even know. Like, this is exactly the kind of deck I wouldn't have ever considered purchasing, even as few as, like, say, 10 years ago. But it is everything to me. When I want something cuddly, I will often put this deck by my bed, and I'll pull a card for reflection at bedtime. And it's perfect for that. And the reason that this is my Sloth deck is because I don't effort at all with this deck. I pull a card, I read the little message. Sometimes I'll also read the full message from the guidebook, and then I put it away. And that is all I've ever done with this deck. It's all I probably ever will do with this deck. I don't really pay too much attention to the image. To me, the image just adds to the cozy sort of aesthetic of the deck. I don't know if the image even ties or correlates into the cards. It looks like it might now that I'm actually looking at it, but I've never cared, because really what I like is that it's this gentle, loving little deck with these sweet sort of, not empowering, I would say nurturing, calming, gentle messages. And I love that about it. And it feels it feels in a lot of ways more like an oracle deck. But it has the full system of tarot represented here. And I really, really love this deck. Again, so far from my aesthetic, there are some references to angels, but I don't recall there being a ton of references specifically to God, which I appreciated. I think they're still in here. I'm not going to pretend that they're not. I'm sure they're there, but they don't feel as in my face as everything else. There are a lot of messages like, you know, your angels are doing this for you. They are watching out for you, that sort of thing. But it's always felt really neutral, in spite of looking anything but neutral when it comes to, say, decks that feel kind of, you know, angel-y and Christian-y or whatever might be not my thing. I can't quite pinpoint it, but whatever that is, it feels like it's subtle and it's kind of woven in there in a way that just really works for me. And I genuinely really enjoy this deck. And in fact, it lived on my bedside almost exclusively for an entire year, I think. It now comes out every once in a while when I really need a hug. This is very much a hug deck for me, but that is that. Wait, I almost forgot. Pride. So I forgot to talk about my Pride deck. So the prompt that I wrote down was a deck that you got for flexing or something along those lines. I don't like flexing. I kind of, yeah, not a fan. But I did immediately think of the deck that first made me feel that sense of pride. And it was the Naked Heart Tarot. And this is specifically, I believe, the third edition. I always forget which edition I have. I want to say it's the third. Let me just double check the guidebook. I'm going to just cheat myself here. This is the, still don't know. I'm pretty sure it's the third edition. I think it's the third edition. Okay, there's a story. This is a beautiful deck, but I actually had the opportunity to meet Jillian, the creator of this deck. She lives in my area, and I'd had a chance to meet up with her at a tea event that I went to, and I met up with her several times. And we got chatting the one day, and at the time, I was gushing to her about how much I loved the first edition, or the second edition I had, the guidebook. And Jillian, it was so sweet. We ended up having this really incredible conversation about the guidebook because she was planning a big overhaul of the guidebook in the second edition. And I remember thinking, oh no, because the first edition, or second, again, I can't remember which edition, the edition of the guidebook that I had was really thick. And this one actually is quite a bit more compact. But it was very, very thick, to the point where my copy, actually, pages had started to get loose because the binding, it was so thick. And so it was quite chunky, but I loved it. I felt like it was such a good, I can't talk. I felt like it was such a good guidebook. And I was just kind of gushing. And I could see it on her face as she was talking about the changes, that she was like, oh no, what if it's not great with the second, you know what I mean? With the edition that she was working on. And at the time, I didn't even know she was working on a new edition. And at the time, it was also something she wasn't really talking about publicly. But she shared that with me, and we were chatting about it. And she told me kind of what she was thinking for the next edition. And I kind of was sharing my thoughts on what I thought about that. And it was just a really cool conversation. And then a little while later, we had gone to a book signing event for, I want to say it was like Ethany's Your Tarot Court. It might have been before that. I can't remember now. But there was a book signing event we'd gone to, and we were at my favorite metaphysical bookstore. And she kind of came up to me when I was wandering the aisles of the bookstore, and she said, I'd really like to offer you a copy of this new edition of the Naked Heart Tarot for you to review on your YouTube channel. And at the time, you guys, my YouTube channel was, I felt, incredibly tiny. I felt like I was just in this little quiet corner of YouTube, just kind of doing my thing. And, I didn't feel like that made sense for what I was doing at the time. I felt like, oh, my channel is so little, like that. And I'm not kidding. This is what I did. I'm going to confess right now. It was kind of it was embarrassing. But basically, she's like, I'd like to offer you this for my channel for review. And I said, oh my God, thank you. And then I said, excuse me, I have to go freak out right now. And I literally left that moment where she was standing. I left that spot and I walked to a completely different aisle and kind of did the whole jumping up and down, clapping my hands thing. It was ridiculous. But it was such a moment because I felt like, oh, she wants me to have it on my YouTube channel. It felt like, oh, I'm like a real YouTuber now. It was such a silly, giddy moment. And it's so funny to me looking back because it was the very first deck I'd ever been offered to review. And it was the sweetest thing. I didn't feel like at the time that it was much more than a very generous offer of her, because I didn't have this huge reach or anything like that. And it just felt really special. And I feel embarrassed even talking about it, to be honest. But I was such a goof. And she was really sweet about it. But she did send me the deck for me to review, or give it to me the next time we saw each other in person or whatever it was. And I was just so dang excited. And you can definitely still go see that review on my channel. I don't remember if I talk about the experience much. I'm guessing I probably didn't share the whole part about, excuse me, let me go freak out right now. It is possible I've shared that story in the past, but I don't think I have, because it's kind of, like I said, semi-embarrassing, low-key embarrassing. There's been a couple of other things that happened to me early in my tarot journey where I encountered deck creators and turned into a dork, but that is definitely one of them. And so I think when it comes to pride, this is the deck that I feel like just hit me in that ego place of like, oh my gosh, you want me to make a video about your deck? Like, it was such a spectacular moment for me and very memorable. And this deck is special to me, partly because of that, but also because Jillian has such a kind, sweet soul, and you can't meet her and not recognize just how special she is as a human being. And this deck represents that as well to me. And it's a really special deck. But yeah, that's what I feel like when I think of pride. And that, my friends, those are my 7 Deadly Sins decks. Thank you so much for coming along with me for this journey, for listening to me babble on about the decks that I associate with 7 Deadly Sins. And of course, thank you to Silvain's Deadly Sins for creating the tag. It has been so much fun to watch other people's responses, and it was really fun to do my own responses. So thank you so much for that. As always, if you enjoyed this video, click the like button. Don't forget to subscribe if you're new here and you want more content just like this, and click the little notification bell to be notified of my future videos and live streams. Thank you all so much, and may your magic always shine from the inside out. Bye, guys.